Welcome to the Work Trends Podcast, brought to you by Talent Culture. I'm your host, Megan M. Bureau. Each episode, I interview really smart people who are reimagining the world of work. Be sure to stay current with all of our insightful podcasts by visiting our page at Talent Culture Work Trends on Apple Podcast or Spotify. And of course, you can listen at talentculture.com on the podcast page. Hello, and welcome to the Talent Culture Work Trends Podcast, sponsored by FAMA. I'm your host, Megan M. Bureau, and today we are discussing how today's multi-generational workforce is more active online than ever, and why organizations need a proactive approach to online behavior. From political commentary and substance use to discriminatory language, having a thoughtful, consistent process in place can help you mitigate risk and make informed hiring decisions before issues escalate. But before we begin today's podcast, I've got some homework for you. I want you to ask yourself these two questions. Are you currently reviewing online behavior as part of your background screening process? And number two, what examples have you seen in the media that reinforce the need for proactive monitoring? We are so happy to be joined by Ben Monis, founder and CEO of FAMA. Welcome back to the podcast, Ben. It's always a joy to be with you and hear your smart insights.
Thank you, Megan. Great to be back. Can you still say Happy New Year in February? Can you do that? I don't know.
You can.
Okay. Well, Happy New Year.
Well,
great to be back.
You know what? I thought I was the only one wishing people Happy New Year, Ben. No, we have the opportunity to start fresh here with FAMA. And guess what, Work Trends community? We've got some news for you. For those of you unfamiliar with FAMA's in-depth research on misconduct, what should organizational leaders, recruiters, and hiring professionals know right now, Ben? There is so much going on.
Lot going on, always a lot going on, but it feels like, this year's really started at kind of a breakneck pace, 0 to 100, as they say. Look, the one thing I'm really having a lot of conversations with now, there's so much to know, as you pointed out, but the one sort of recurring theme in conversations I'm having with our clients, we tend to work with, a wide range of both talent acquisition, risk management, and, folks in the background screening universe. But the one kind of recurring theme is that there are 6 generations in the workplace in 2026. We are living in a workforce now where more than half of the people employed in the United States are either Gen Z or millennial. And that number is set to climb to 70% by 2028. What does that mean for screening? What does that mean for, managing workplace misconduct? Is that a lot of the behaviors, I think, that employers have long evaluated when they're trying to make a decision about when this person comes in, are they going to help us advance our mission? Are they going to contribute to a great brand, a welcoming workplace culture? At the end of the day, just to boil it down, we're talking about behavior. How's this person behaved in the past? How they behaved in the interview, right? And so what we're seeing now is that for this, what I'll call like digital native generation, more than half of the workplace is Gen Z and millennial. A lot of those behavioral signals that employers were seeking to identify as part of that talent screening process are living and found online, right? Where we are now seeing the same sort of rigorous approach of analyzing someone's behavior, whether it was, historically psychographic, role play scenarios you put somebody in, or more generally just trying to get a sense of a person's previous experiences, their capabilities, and how those align with the future capabilities and requirements they're going to have. Those same sorts of signals for doing real deep behavioral analysis we're seeing are now appearing online, and FAMA helps companies find those signals. So that's been kind of the simplicity of this year, which has been cool. We used to have to explain what we did in this complex way of who you are online and how that translates into, the workplace and signals appearing on the internet that could eventually, lead an employer to make a decision based on who you hire. But then we kind of boiled it down. We're like, wait, if the whole workforce today is Gen Z and millennial, and those are people who, like myself, as a late stage millennial, as I like to call myself.
You went there. See that, Ben? We didn't even have to ask you that question.
One of us. That's me, right? So I'm a proud millennial, and look, I got my Facebook account in 2004 when you had to have a .edu email address to get one, right? And so, we're kind of at this beginning of the the kind of wave, if you will, where those sorts of behaviors that employers have long sought to identify for the majority of the workforce for the first time, those signals are predominantly appearing online rather than offline. So, that kind of unlock is the one thing I'd encourage listeners to kind of take a look at. Like, what's your workforce look like? And are you evolving the way that you screen talent to reflect those demographic changes that are underway?
Yeah, because if you're not, it gets kind of embarrassing, right? Because we are online. And I have to tell you, Ben, this is a good foundation for getting started while we all know that the internet can be wild and woolly. I think it's important to have processes in place to protect our organizations, our people, our reputations, and provide a culture of safety. So, having said all that, how is the six, and I just said six, everybody, put your seatbelts on, sixth generation workforce shaping how we should update our screening approach?
Well, look, I think you bring up a great point, and the only, and not even pushback, but just a way to tweak the statement you just made is like, employers already have these
I
policies in
know.
place, right? Like, we're not talking about asking employers to do anything different in the methodology or in the why or in the purpose, right? But we're talking about changing the practice itself and evolving the method to a degree that supports kind of the why historically, right? Which is essentially to say, like, again, are we evolving how we screen to reflect the demographic changes that we're seeing? Because to your point, things are evolving quickly, right? In the marketplace that we're in, we've seen a range of different things that have happened over the past year, right? I think we saw the very unfortunate the murder of Charlie Kirk, and a lot of people on both sides who were talking very negatively about
Mhm.
the person's murder and that blowback on employers. We saw that last year. That was kind of the big seminal event in our space of real employer risk. But the broader implications outside of these kind of temporal events, we saw in our data last year that multiple incidents of misconduct are now occurring every 30 days for the clients that we work with. In other words,
Wow.
2 years ago, we would start to see customers with what we call material flags, where they take action about every 60 days or so. So, again, more of these
Right.
like high impact, low probability. This stuff isn't designed to happen that much, right? We're kind of the fail safe. We're kind of the validator for your existing process to make sure that all the checks and balances you put into place to make sure you're bringing in good people, that's actually working, right? That's really what FAMA is. And, the one thing that we've seen as of late, in our law enforcement world, just to throw in a more salacious example here, we work with a lot of law enforcement. We do a lot in financial services, healthcare. But there was police officers making OnlyFans videos while on duty. You had healthcare workers who were recording patients while they were passed out, right? These are things
Whoa.
are all happening online. This type of misconduct that's out there that I think employers can ill afford to fly blind to. But obviously, I think that I'm the founder and CEO of the company that sells that product. So of course I'm going to say something like that. But at the end of the day, this is one of these things where I don't think employers are having to change their why. I don't think they're having to kind of come in and evolve the foundations of how do we evaluate people. It's really just, is the methodology evolving to reflect, as you just said, the fact that we've now got 6 generations in the workforce.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, Ben, I've been talking about multi-generational workforces. Well, actually, to date myself, now that Ben has gone out there as a millennial, everyone, and if you've been listening to me long enough, you're gonna guess that I'm not a millennial. You're right. I'm a Gen Xer. So we have to step back and remember that we have friends, we have colleagues, we have family who weren't even alive when we were navigating the first days of Instagram, YouTube, or any other platform out there that, frankly, is, if you've been listening to me, I've been playing on a while too.
Totally.
But, and again, we don't want to date ourselves because that's not what matters here, everybody. Right? Like, yes, MMB has some humor, but we all know this is so serious. That's why I care about Fama and Ben and what you're doing so much, because we have to shine a light on tough lessons learned. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of hearing about violence personally, professionally. I know a lot of you out there in the community are as well. I mean, Ben, can you share real life examples that have created these issues, but then explain how these situations can happen anywhere around the world, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, to your point, and that's why I love coming back on the pod, like we were talking before. We got started here. But part of it is you do have to kind of lift up the rug and see what's under there from time to time, right? That's part of how we improve, how we get better is facing the bad stuff, so to speak, head on and growing through adversity to a degree. So philosophically, I'm totally on board. And I think a lot of employers are too. I think that's the other key piece that we're seeing here. When we look at financial services firms, look at the top, wealth managers and banks in the country, the top 100 or so, we've got 70% of them who are doing some form of social media or online screening. And, it's similarly pervasive, I think, in a lot of high stakes, highly regulated industry. I think healthcare, for example, education, just two examples there. And we're talking here in February 2026, but just 2 weeks ago, there was a nurse who was posting, photos of people who were under anesthesia, right? You had a principal that we found last year who was saying racist things online about the students in her school. And she's in a, very Tony, call it
Yep.
suburb outside of Chicago. And, a very, high stakes, high impact sort of thing that happened there. But to your point, it's not just leadership, right, that's being affected. It's not just like the principal of a school that there's some article about, but we've talked, I think in previous versions, we've spoken together about the misconduct multiplier effect, right? Where the normalization of aberrant behavior in a workplace, especially in what I'll call kind of vertically oriented organizations, where signals of leadership, signals of this is how it is, so to speak, are passed down from the top of the leadership chain to the front lines. And, a lot of that, when we talk about the misconduct multiplier effect, if you see somebody in an interview, or let's take it, past the interview. Let's go right all the way to full-time employment. If I'm in a meeting and John, who I'm in a meeting with, and I just joined the company and John is 2 levels above me, John makes a sexist comment. Another great example of an executive, who's creating a boys club culture. We've all seen it, right? Or makes a sexist comment about a woman in the room and people kind of laugh it off. And I'm a new hire.
Sure.
I might be like, wait, this is cool here? This is how they talk? All right, I'm going to jump on board, right? And while that sounds crazy, in a
Yeah.
politically oriented organization, when somebody who is in power, no matter what they say or how they say it, they are projecting authority, they are projecting leadership, they're projecting power in every utterance, every single word that they make. And I think we've all seen that, right? Where no matter how ethical you think you are, when you are in a position of leadership or power and you begin acting that way, other people follow your example. And Harvard actually quantified that in a study with Cornerstone On Demand called the misconduct multiplier effect, which essentially shows that one single incidence of misconduct in the workplace leads to 1.5x the amount of misconduct on that particular team. So, in other words, like if you let these sorts of things go unchecked, and if the signal is apparent, if it's available, right? I think for a long time, employers thought they had to identify these behaviors through other means, again, through references, through
Yeah.
back channeling, through suspect, psychographic analysis, right? Like to try to get a read on this behavior. Well, for the first time for more than half your workforce, you've got years and years of history that you can compile and sift through without exposing yourself to protected class information or, all the other stuff that employers shouldn't see as part of our
Yeah.
hiring process. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's really interesting times that we're living through, without a doubt. Long-winded way of answering your question, but
Well, I mean, it's everything, Ben, from wasted recruiting and onboarding, right, to the legal exposure, which we all need to be tuning into. I mean, the cost is real, and the cost of onboarding alone is a topic I've talked about over the years. And I think this adds a new dimension, a new urgency, not to waste investments on people that are not aligning with your company's values, because now we're seeing again that multiplier effect. So let's go there. Let's get into regulatory compliance. I mean, how does this compliance factor in, and what should listeners understand early so it doesn't become kind of this big thing later?
Yeah, it's funny when you're starting a company and make kind of business decisions about where you want to place your bets, right? But one of the bets we made early on was investing in compliance ahead of the curve, right? And so, we are for those of you in the know and love talking about compliance, open up your ears because we are
Mm-hmm.
we're a GDPR compliant company, EU AI Act, New York AI Act, PIPEDA in California. Part of that for us was saying that the use and the bet that the use of these technologies was only going to advance, and that consumer discussion around consumer rights and whether it was, governments like the European Union, for example, or state governments in New York and California that kind of, set the tone for privacy and consumer law around the rest of this country. Those are going to begin to affect how this technology is deployed. And look no further than, the eightfold AI lawsuit that's going on right now, right? Where they're essentially
Right.
saying, hey, look, check out, how this person scored, et cetera. But that candidate never gets an opportunity to dispute or review those scores, right? That candidate never gets an opportunity to understand how that score was contemplated, or how that was created, right? And there's existing case law here. It wasn't talked about for a long time because these AI tools were in fairly minimal use, but there was something called for all my, again, HR compliance nerds out there.
We got plenty of them. Hey Ben, we're here. We're listening.
All right, good. Yeah, because that is me. There's something called the guidelines, which my fellow nerds out there know is called the Uniform Guidelines for Employment Selection Procedures. It's called UJESP. But essentially what it is that it defined a framework of explainability, right? Very early on around how these tools could be used. If you are going to use a score on a person, you have to be explicitly able to explain how that score was created and the facts, that go into it. And I say facts for a reason, because what you're seeing a lot of now are these black box AI tools that are scoring candidates, deciding who gets an interview, who doesn't, based on questionable training data sources and all that. So a lot of the investments we made early were like, this is a FICRA compliant company. This is a GDPR compliant company. We got the notice on GDPR in 2016, right when we were getting started. And luckily, by the time it came into effect in 2018, we had built a technology stack that essentially allowed us to offer consumers the right to be forgotten, to request a copy of their report, a framing that focused on job relevant or business purpose relevant information. But I think the simplest advice I can give to users of these technologies out there are you have to be able to draw a straight line between the thing that you are using and the business impact that, gone unchecked, that tool is helping you identify risk. In other words, like in our world of social media and online screening, we have to be explicit. Like the reason that we are flagging this post is because John said something, to use a good example, misogynist, right? You have women who work at your company, and this person is not going to be able to work at your company effectively if they think less of women because of,
Right.
their gender, right? And so, that sounds silly that, wow, we really have to validate that. We really have to kind of say why someone saying something sexist is important. But the short answer is yes. And you have to be able to draw a straight line between the insight and tool you use and business impact. And if you can't do that today, or the vendor that you're talking to can't explain how their tools impact a business, and to do it in a way that's not just trust us, but show me the data, show me the insight, show me the algorithm, then that's a technology question you should ask yourself. Because if you're a big enterprise, especially, you got a lot of risk across all the people that you've evaluated.
Oh my God. Oh my goodness. Understatement of the century, Ben. Seriously. I mean, this gets to the heart of not just following the rules, but understanding what they really are. And listeners, I hear from you all the time the importance of compliance. And I think Ben is making some very good points worth noting today. So you're going to have some homework from me, okay? You're used to this. So there you go. Listen, time is flying. We're having a ball here with Ben, but we're on our final question. All right, this is the biggie.
Uh-oh.
What is your recommendation on ownership, approach, and cadence for initiatives that monitor employees and candidates' online behavior?
Yeah, it's a big one for sure. I mean, I think it goes back to, funnily enough, in a roundabout way, and unintentionally got here, but what we just talked about, right? Which is like, we have to identify the types of risks that are important to our business. What are the types of behaviors that we need to know before we bring somebody on board? Or if we're talking about an existing workforce that we want to manage in terms of the risks that are on the table in front of us, right? And what I mean by that is, like, if I'm hiring for a set of roles in my organization, I am sure many of us can point to the behaviors that we screen for as a derivative of our code of conduct, our code of ethics, our employee handbook, right? The sorts of things that say this is the guidance for how we behave and how we treat each other. And that does, actually, as I've seen many of these over the years, this does tend to vary company by company. So I think the first thing you have to ask yourself on the pre-employment side are like, what do we care about from a behavior perspective? What are we screening for? What matters to us when it comes to behavior and risk for people that we're hiring? Same question for your existing workforce, right? We're not talking about, in any of these cases, really, if someone in the US election voted for Trump or Harris. We're not talking about what your stance on, illegal immigration is. We're not talking about all these touchy subjects that you don't bring up at Thanksgiving, you don't bring up in front of your in-laws for a reason, right? Because they don't come up at work and they shouldn't come up at work. But when I'm looking at my existing workforce, I might be looking at people who are leaking confidential information about my business. Believe it or not, in financial services, guidance was just released in December that in the UK, non-financial misconduct that happens online between employees, harassment or violent threats, for example, that could have a negative impact on that person's ability to do their job or remain fit, in all capital letters, that's an acronym, under the FCA, which is their version of the SEC and FINRA, is going to include what happens online between employers or employees, right? And so what that means is that employers in that sector in the UK are going to have to screen for harassment and fraud and violence to be compliant as it appears online, right? And so it all starts with you of determining exactly what you want to flag for. That's the starting point. And what are the behaviors and risks to your business? I wouldn't even think about, well, what about on social media? No, don't even go there. What are the behaviors you care about? What are the risks that are important to you to manage in this broader context of people risk management? And then, let the technology figure itself out from there. But start with the why, start with the what, and then let the how follow there.
Once again, Ben, you have provided our community with some real actionable strategies. I think that is going to spark some very interesting conversations about what to be aware of, how to think about this entire important topic in a strategic and, most important to Ben and I and our teams, both at FAMA and Talent Culture, do it in a thoughtful way. Do it in a way where your buyer, your audience, your community knows you care. That's why we're here. That's why we're in HR. That's why we're developing these great products, to make sure that that empathy that I know so many of you have in the audience is extended to every single thing you touch. So, Ben, you're the best. Thank you for stopping by.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Megan. And hope you have a great rest of your Feb, and we'll talk again soon.
Ben, it is always a joy to speak with you and learn from FAMA's research. Thank you so much for everything you shared with us today. I mean, not only was it engaging, it's so important. So here are a few of my key takeaways. Number one, online misconduct is a measurable risk area that impacts hiring, retention, culture, and brand reputation. It's impossible to simply look the other way. Number two, proactive monitoring is not just surveillance. It's about protecting people, protecting culture, and protecting long-term organizational investment. And number three, be prepared. Understand not only compliance, but your own organizational guidelines for what's acceptable and what is not. We collectively strive for positive, healthy, productive workplace cultures, and online behavior undoubtedly plays a role. We look forward to the new State of Misconduct report. I can't wait to dive into it. And as always, thanks for listening to the Work Trends Podcast, the place to find meaningful connections about and at work. If you love what we do here, do me a favor. Share it, would you? With your friends, your family. Hey, share with your neighbors. Or send us a question on the socials using the hashtag WorkTrends. Thank you so much. See you soon. Thanks for joining us for today's conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I love learning something new in each and every episode. Just a reminder that you can listen to all of the Work Trends podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and the podcast page at talentculture.com or your favorite podcast platform. Be sure to subscribe so you can listen on the go and stay up to date on all the latest news you want to hear. I look forward to catching up with y'all next time, and I hope today's information made you wiser, happier, more informed, and most importantly, thinking of how you can use it to improve the quality of your career, your life, and your world of work.